August 28th, 1944, 0620 hours. Near the Seine River, east of Montes-la-Jolie, a thin autumn mist drifts across the treetops as First Lieutenant Jack Harlow pushes the throttle of his P-47D Thunderbolt forward until the engine growls like a caged animal. The cockpit is already hot despite the early hour. Sweat beads along his temples, but he barely notices. His eyes are fixed on the pale horizon where smoke rises in several thin columns. German armor moving northwest. Below him, the ground is a mosaic of shattered farmhouses and churned-up fields. The retreat from Normandy has turned every road into a scar. The Germans are falling back toward the Seine, but they are not running blindly. Reports from French resistance scouts say a reassembled armored column, remnants of the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division mixed with scattered Wehrmacht vehicles, is pushing to block the American advance across the river. If they reach the river crossings first, they can hold for days, maybe longer. Harlow's squadron, Thunderbolts of the 362nd Fighter Group, was scrambled before dawn to stop them. They launched with half-empty stomachs, barely awake. But the moment wheels left the ground, every man knew today was one of those missions that would be talked about in hushed tones for years. Harlow glances left. Captain Frank Duke Ellison, his flight lead, banks slightly, signaling formation tighten up. Even at this altitude, the ground trembles with the distant rumble of engines, dozens of them. German tanks crawling toward the river like steel beetles. The squadron descends through a thin band of fog, and the world opens beneath them. A convoy. Dozens of vehicles. Panzer IVs, several hulking Jagdpanzer IV tank destroyers, half-tracks, fuel trucks, and motorcycles weaving through the column like nervous wasps. The Germans are moving fast, too fast for a textbook bombing run. By the time the Thunderbolts set up a proper approach, the armor will already be under the trees, shielded by a winding forest road. Captain Ellison's voice crackles over the radio. 2 flights, prepare for standard dive sequence. Altitude entry at 8,000. Make it clean, make it quick. But before they even begin their ascent, Harlow sees the problem. The Germans, perhaps from instinct, perhaps from the whisper of engines overhead, suddenly scatter toward the edges of the forest road. Trucks swerve, tanks angle toward the tree line. They're already slipping under cover. A normal dive-bombing attack won't stop them in time. Harlow swallows hard, takes a breath, and does something he has not done since training, something every instructor warned him could kill him outright. He drops to nearly treetop level, pulling the Thunderbolt into a shallow, dangerous glide just 20 meters above the fields. The canopy rattles. Branches whip by. His altimeter unwinds so fast it looks broken. He cuts across the front of the formation, low and fast, banking so tightly the Thunderbolt's wings almost kiss the grass. Ellison's shocked voice bursts through the headset. "Harlow, climb back up! What the hell are you doing?" Harlow doesn't answer. He can't. His entire focus narrows into a single electrified line. The edge of the German column, still exposed, not yet swallowed by the trees. He arms one of his 500-pound general-purpose bombs, sets the release for low-altitude drop, and angles his nose directly at the lead half-track. This isn't standard doctrine. This is skip bombing, but done with a Thunderbolt, not a bomber. A technique improvised in the Pacific, but barely ever used in Europe, and never at this altitude. He's so low the ground seems to reach up toward him. The engine's roar pushes air across the wheat fields in violent waves. Even from the cockpit, he can see German crewmen looking up, pointing, scrambling. Too late. Harlow pulls the release. The bomb drops, strikes the ground once, and skitters forward like a skipping stone. It slams into the front half-track's left side and detonates in a thunderous bloom of smoke, dirt, and torn metal. The shock wave slams into the Thunderbolt, jolting Harlow's spine, but he holds the stick steady. The lead vehicle disappears into flame. The next tank breaks. The convoy accordion stops, momentum shattered. In the sudden chaos, smoke curling upward, engines stalling, voices shouting. The rest of the squadron sees an opening. Ellison hesitates only a heartbeat. All flights, follow Harlow's vector, low-level run, hit the gaps before they reach the tree line. 8 thunderbolts peel down like hawks. The forest explodes with sound, engines throttling, bombs dropping almost horizontally, German machine guns firing wildly toward the treetops. Harlow pulls up just enough to avoid the ground, banking hard as tracers streak past his left wingtip like red needles. The Thunderbolt shudders under the strain, but he keeps her steady, breath sharp, eyes blazing. Because he sees something the others don't yet. The Germans aren't retreating anymore. They're panicking. The entire armored column is snarled, exposed, caught in the open. And for the first time all morning, the Americans have the battlefield exactly where they want it. The shock wave from the first explosion still ripples through the air as Harlow climbs to barely 50 feet. The Thunderbolt's massive radial engine howling in protest. The smoke column from the shattered half-track billows upward like a dark pillar, marking the exact moment the German column lost its rhythm. But down below, the danger is nowhere near over. German tracers stitch across the hedgerows, sharp, bright lines, reaching for the diving American fighters. A Jagdpanzer IV, turretless and low to the ground, swings its long 75mm gun toward the screaming aircraft, its commander half exposed in the hatch, shouting orders lost beneath the roar of engines. Harlow banks hard left. A shell erupts where he had been less than a second earlier, showering the road with dirt and splintering wood. The Thunderbolt groans under the sudden torque. He pushes lower. Too low. Branches reach for his belly. The ground whips by at a speed that makes the landscape blur into streaks of green and brown. Harlow's breath comes tight, shallow. His gloved fingers tighten around the control stick until his knuckles ache. Behind him, Duke Ellison drops his own bomb in a near horizontal arc. It slams into the flank of a Panzer IV, ripping open the hull, flipping the turret backward like a loose coin. Flames erupt from the commander's hatch. The tank's machine gun sputters for a moment and dies. Ellison comes in on the radio, his voice tense but steadier than the chaos below. Good hit! Keep pressure on them. Don't let the armor find cover. 3 other Thunderbolts roar past, each throwing 50 caliber streams across the column. The sound is deafening, a thunderstorm of gunfire rolling over the treetops. German infantry scatter. Fuel trucks swerve. Drivers leap from the cabs. Half-tracks fishtail and collide in clouds of dust. The entire column is dissolving into frantic, uncoordinated motion. And amidst that disorder, a second opportunity opens. A cluster of fuel trucks has bottlenecked at a bend in the forest road. 5 of them, bumper to bumper, each carrying hundreds of gallons of fuel meant for the armor spearheading the counterattack. If they ignite, the road will turn into a furnace. Harlow sees it instantly. He throttles down again, nudging the nose toward the bend. Another bombing run here might seal the entire forest corridor for hours, maybe longer. But this run is trickier. The trucks sit under the beginnings of a canopy where the forest juts out. Bombing from altitude would be useless. It has to be another forbidden run, another rule broken. He angles down until the thunderbolt is practically kissing the treetops. The vibration in the control surfaces becomes a warning shiver. One misjudgment, and he'll clip a branch and spiral straight into the forest. Ellison shouts into the radio, "Harlow, you break that low again, and the only thing we're mailing home is your dog tags." But he doesn't order him to stop. Harlow arms his second 500-pound bomb. The trucks are closing in fast, close enough now that he can see the canvas covers trembling from the concussion of nearby explosions. He lines up the nose, heart pounding so hard he can hear it over the engine. He releases. The bomb drops low, skips once on the forest floor, once more against a protruding root, and then slams into the rear fuel truck. For a heartbeat, nothing happens. Then light. A white bloom at first, blinding, then a violent roar as all 5 trucks erupt in a chain reaction. Fire sweeps upward like a rising curtain. An expanding wall of heat punches into the trees, bending saplings and blowing metal fragments into the air like shrapnel. The entire road becomes a burning throat. Harlow yanks his stick back, pulling the thunderbolt upward just enough to clear the exploding tree line. Flames lick at his belly. The shock wave shudders through the fuselage. He breaks into clean sky, panting. Below him, the forest road is impassable. Completely. The German column, now split in 2 by the inferno, is trapped. Tanks at the front halt abruptly, unsure if the road ahead is mined or bombed. Vehicles at the rear crash into each other trying to reverse. And into that paralysis, the Americans press harder. Ellison calls out, "All birds, form staggered runs. Make it messy for them. Target engines, tracks, open tops. We're cutting this serpent in half." A second wave of thunderbolts spirals down. Their 50 cals rake through fleeing infantry. Another bomb rips open a tank destroyer. A motorcycle team skids into a ditch as the rider tries to fire wildly upward. The battlefield becomes a kind of rolling thunderstorm. Smoke rising, branches snapping, explosions echoing through the forested valley. But amidst all this chaos, something else catches Harlow's attention. Something the others haven't seen yet. A remaining pocket of German armor, several Panzer IVs, and a verbal wind anti-aircraft tank, positioned not near the road but deeper in the trees, using the forest as cover to angle their guns toward the American fighters. They're not running, they're preparing a trap. Harlow banks sharply, sweat burning down his cheek, eyes fixed on the dark gap where the tanks concealed themselves. The rule book may have shattered today, but the fight isn't over, not even close. And what waits in those trees may decide whether the squadron makes it home at all. Harlow dips his left wing, squinting through the drifting smoke. Between the trunks of oak and ash, a darker shape lurks, flat-topped, boxy, unmistakable. A verbal wind. Its quadruple 20 mm cannons glint faintly as they track upward, like the eyes of a predator scanning the sky for prey. But that's not all. Behind it, spaced like silent sentinels in the gloom, sit 3 Panzer IVs, engines rumbling low, waiting for the American pattern to repeat. The Germans have fought long enough to know how the thunderbolts operate. Initial chaos, then staggered strafing runs. Predict the run, and you can time the shot. Ellison's voice cracks over the radio. "Be advised, AAA in the tree line. Repeat, quad 20 in the cover. Eyes sharp. But his warning comes a fraction too late. The whirlwind opens up. 4 barrels spew fire at once, shredding the morning calm with a ripping, metallic snarl. Bright tracers streak up in perfectly measured arcs, forcing 2 thunderbolts to break off immediately. Their attack runs scattered into evasive corkscrews. Harlow's stomach knots. He knows the reputation of the whirlwind. At close range, those cannons don't just damage aircraft, they pulverize them. Another burst lances skyward. A thunderbolt in the upper right of the formation takes a grazing hit along its left wing. Aluminum shears off in a glittering spray. Lieutenant Mason curses through the radio. Taking hits, pulling out. The forest erupts again, this time with the booming crack of tank guns. A Panzer IV sends a round skyward that whistles past Ellison's tail like a screaming banshee. It bursts above the canopy in a violent bloom of shrapnel. Ellison snaps into a tight turn, barely dodging another volley. "They're bracketing us," he shouts. "This isn't an accident. They're setting a kill zone in there." Harlow banks low, lining up his approach. The logical answer is to climb, regroup, and re-engage from altitude. That's doctrine. That's what every manual, every instructor, every common-sense instinct says to do. But Harlow has already broken doctrine twice today. And he senses something else. If the Germans complete their setup, if the Wirbelwind and the Panzer I-4s finish triangulating their firing arcs, the entire squadron could be shredded in minutes. They have a tiny window, seconds, to stop the trap before it snaps shut. He drops low again, too low, dangerously low. The treetops scrape the belly of his P-47 like rough fingers. The vibration rattles his bones. He can barely see the sky anymore, just branches blurring overhead and the smoky glow of burning trucks behind him. Ellison sees what he's doing. "Harlow! Negative! Negative! That quad 20 will saw you in half!" Harlow's reply is a low, breathless whisper. "Only if they see me." He kills his throttle to idle. The thunderbolt, normally a roaring, unstoppable beast, suddenly becomes a gliding hulk, slicing silently forward, hidden below the tree line, masked by smoke. He angles his nose toward the faint silhouette of the Wirbelwind. Branches whip past like spears. Leaves slap the canopy. The forest becomes a tunnel of green and shadow, and Harlow is a bullet riding straight through it. He arms his last 500-pound bomb. He has no altitude to climb, no margin for error, no escape route. The Wirbelwind fires again, shredding the sky above him. But the gunners don't see what's coming below. Harlow squeezes the release. The bomb drops not onto open road, but into the dense underbrush. It plows forward, slamming into a fallen tree trunk that redirects it like a cue ball. The bomb ricochets once, twice, and slides directly beneath the Wirbelwind. The explosion doesn't just destroy it, it erases it. A white-hot detonation tears upward, ripping the turret free, flinging it like a spinning coin high into the branches. The quad barrels twist like broken fingers. Flames shoot upward in a screaming column. The Panzer IV jolt backward in panic, their gunners momentarily blinded by the blast. Harlow's thunderbolt bursts upward from the greenery, clawing for the open sky as roots and debris whirl behind him. Ellison's voice explodes in his ears, half fury, half disbelief. "You mad son of a... hell of a shot, Harlow." But Harlow can't celebrate yet. The destruction of the Wirbelwind has exposed the remaining German tanks. They begin rotating their turrets, searching for targets. Ellison seizes the moment. All birds! Tanks in the open! They're blind! Take your runs now! 4 thunderbolts dive simultaneously. 50 caliber rounds hammer the tank crews. 2 aircraft drop fragmentation bombs that rip through the foliage, showering metal splinters across the armored hulls. 1 Panzer IV erupts in a violent flash as its stored ammo cooks off, throwing the turret skyward. The remaining tank tries to retreat deeper into the forest, but the road is blocked. The burning fuel trucks behind them roar like an oven. The thunderbolts above swarm like hawks. The ambush collapses. The German trap evaporates before it can fully spring. But as the smoke thins, Harlow notices something else. Movement. Not retreat. Not surrender. A new German element, deeper in the forest, maneuvering toward the river road, one the squadron hasn't targeted yet. And this force isn't fleeing, it's advancing. Another armored push, a reserve, hidden, unexpected. The real threat may not have been this ambush at all. It may be what's coming next. Smoke coils through the trees like dark fog as Harlow climbs just high enough to regain visibility. Below him, the burning wreck of the whirlwind still spits glowing embers into the branches. The air reeks of cordite, sap, and scorched fuel. But deeper in the forest, past the charred debris, past the shattered Panzer IVs, movement stirs. Not scattered infantry, not isolated vehicles. A formed unit. Harlow's breath tightens as he cranes his neck, banking gently to keep eyes on the shifting shapes in the shadows. What emerges makes his blood run cold. A second armored column, bigger, fresh, organized. He counts at least 6 Panzer IVs, 2 Jagdpanzerrifles, several armored half-tracks, and, worse, a flak Panzer Ostwind. The dreaded single-barrel 37mm anti-aircraft gun, notorious for its accuracy. These aren't stragglers. This is a deliberate counterattack force, hidden until now, held in reserve to strike once the Americans committed to the first target. The Germans weren't just retreating today. They were setting a layered trap, and the Americans flew right into it. Ellison sees it seconds later. What in God's name? Harlow, are you seeing this? That's not recon. That's a full armored spear. The shift in his voice is unmistakable. This isn't excitement, it's calculation. The voice of a commander realizing his squadron may be heavily outnumbered. The radio crackles as other pilots chime in. A captain, those tanks are heading toward the main road. They're trying to flank us. If they reach the river, the infantry crossing is... Ellison cuts them off sharply. Knock it off! Focus! Stay tight! He steadies his tone. But every man can hear the urgency underneath. Harlow circles back, descending behind a drifting veil of smoke to assess the enemy column's formation. The Germans are using tight, disciplined movement. Armor up front, flak in the middle, soft vehicles shielded behind. They're advancing steadily, engines rumbling low like a beast waking from sleep. If they reach the river road, they'll catch the American infantry columns in transit. If they push farther, they could link up with surviving SS units retreating east. We can't let them break out, Harlow mutters to himself. As if reading his mind, Ellison comes over the radio. We hit them now, before they spread, before that Ostwind gets a bead on us. But hitting them won't be simple. The tanks are buried among trees thicker than the earlier ambush point. Traditional dive angles won't work. Vertical attacks are too risky. Too many branches. Too little sky. For a moment, no one speaks. The pilots hover at the edge of the forest, engines idling in uneasy formation. Then Harlow notices something. Smoke from the burning fuel trucks has drifted horizontally, pushed by a low valley wind. The haze spills into the trees, where the second column advances. Soft, rolling, just thick enough to obscure precise targeting, but not thick enough to fully hide aircraft silhouettes. A thought sparks. A stupid thought. A reckless thought. A thought that might buy them the precious seconds needed to shatter the German reserve. He descends again, low, lower than comfort, lower than sanity. Ellison's voice snaps. "Harlow, don't you dare!" But Harlow isn't diving this time. He's weaving. Left, right, left again, zigzagging between the tallest tree trunks. The Thunderbolt's wings nearly clip the branches, the engine backfiring as he squeezes through gaps. No fighter has any business entering. What he's doing has only one purpose: to lure the Ostwind. And it works. The 37 Sabeltor flak cannon swivels toward the sound of his engine, firing through gaps in the canopy. Explosions pepper the undergrowth. Bark explodes from trunks. Leaves blast into confetti. But Harlow is already turning sharply away. He doesn't need to kill the Ostwind. He just needs it looking the wrong way. Ellison sees the opening instantly. "All birds! The quad's distracted. Hit the tanks on the right flank. Now!" Thunderbolts peel off in coordinated pairs. The first duo comes in shallow, threading between the upper branches and releasing fragmentation bombs that scatter lethal steel across the German infantry screens. The second pair dives from the opposite angle, strafing the lead Panzer IV with disciplined bursts. Sparks dance across the hull, and the tank lurches sideways into a fallen tree. Then Harlow slams back into view, this time from a high angle, having used the smoke to mask his climb. He lines up a tightly packed cluster of half-tracks, signals vehicles, radios, ammunition. He squeezes the trigger. 8 50 calls spit fire. The half-tracks erupt like dry kindling. But the Germans aren't broken yet. The remaining Panzer IVs surge forward through the smoke, pushing debris aside, forming a wedge to punch their way out of the forest. The Ostwind, now reacquiring, begins rotating back toward the Thunderbolts. Harlow sees the barrel rising, tracking. If that gun gets a clear shot, at least one of them won't make it out of this forest alive. And right now, he's the one directly in its sights. The Ostwind's turret finishes its slow, ominous turn. Its barrel levels directly at Harlow's Thunderbolt, the matte black maw of the 37mm cannon, looking impossibly wide, impossibly cold. Harlow feels the world tighten around him. He yanks the stick left, rolling hard, but the trees limit his escape routes. He's trapped low, boxed between pillars of bark and smoke, and the Ostwind has the cleaner line of sight. The flak gun fires. A burst of white muzzle flash punches through the forest, followed by a rippling thunk, 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 as armor-piercing shells tear upward toward Harlow. The first shell misses by inches, shredding a branch the size of a man's torso. The second ricochets off a tree trunk, exploding in a shower of bark and splinters. The third slams into Harlow's right wing root with a scream of tortured metal. The entire aircraft judders. Warning lights flicker. The Thunderbolt shimmies like a wounded animal. Harlow grits his teeth, fighting the sudden drag. He's losing lift, losing altitude, losing control, but he's still alive. He forces the throttle forward, too far forward, and the engine coughs in protest before stabilizing. Black smoke pours from the bullet hole in his wing, trailing behind him in a wavering ribbon. Ellison sees the hit. "Harlow, climb! Climb out of the trees, now!" Harlow tries. The Thunderbolt lumbers upward, straining, wobbling. But as he climbs, the Ostwind fires again, this time adjusting its lead. The shells burst overhead, kicking explosions of yellow flame that rattle the canopy. If he keeps climbing, he'll be too slow, too predictable, a clean target. He needs height, he needs speed, he needs space, but he can't have all three. So he makes a choice. He lunges downward again, straight toward the Ostwind. Ellison screams, "Harlow, no! That's suicide!" But it isn't suicide, it's geometry. At close range, anti-aircraft guns are lethal if they can track. But if a fast-moving aircraft comes in low enough, angled enough, and fast enough, the gun can't depress or traverse quickly enough to maintain aim. It's a trick taught unofficially by a handful of veteran pilots. A trick whispered, not printed. A trick instructors call the unapproved dive. Harlow drops so low his wheels graze the tops of ferns. The forest becomes a tunnel again. Dark, roaring, thundering. The Ostwind tries to rotate its turret downward, but the movement is too slow. The barrel dips, chasing Harlow like a predator tracking prey. But the thunderbolt is closing too fast. Harlow arms his last two pairs of 50 cals, aligning the gun sight with the faint silhouette of the Ostwind's driver compartment. He presses the trigger. The world erupts. 6 streams of 50 caliber rounds crash through the tree line, hammering the Ostwind with sparks and fire. The armored superstructure absorbs the first impacts, but the rounds chew deeper, finding seams, vents, weak points. The Ostwind lurks half in shadow, half exposed. Its turret jerks. Its hull rocks. And then the driver's viewport shatters. The Ostwind stops moving. A second later, it detonates. Not in a fiery explosion, but a violent upward burst of pressure that punches the turret off its mount like a kicked drum. The turret flips twice before crashing onto its side in the underbrush. The flak gun is dead, but Harlow is not safe. He's still deep in the kill zone, with a damaged wing, almost no maneuver room, and at least 5 German tanks still moving. He banks to escape, and the wounded Thunderbolt shudders, refusing the turn. The right wing dips too far. The aircraft rolls. The treetops flash dangerously close. Harlow curses under his breath. Another inch lower, and he'll shear off a wing. He slams the throttle again. The P-47 groans. It vibrates hard enough to rattle his teeth. But slowly, painfully, it claws upward. Through a break in the canopy. Into a sliver of pale sky. Out of the trees at last. Ellison exhales audibly over the radio. "Harlow, for God's sake, we thought you were gone." But there's no time for relief. Because now, from this new vantage, Harlow sees the full scale of the danger, the reserve. German column hasn't broken, hasn't scattered. It's accelerating. Not into the forest. Not toward the Thunderbolts. But toward a narrow dirt lane leading northwest. A lane Harlow recognizes. He feels the realization hit him like a punch. That lane leads directly to the American engineers at the river crossing. If the Germans reach them, the bridgehead collapses. Ellison rolls into formation beside him. "Harlow, tell me that's not what I think it is." Harlow swallows. "It is." The Germans aren't retreating at all. They're racing to wipe out the American river crossing, and the Thunderbolts are the only force close enough to stop them. But the squadron is scattered. Harlow is wounded. Bomb racks are nearly empty. And the enemy column is picking up speed. What comes next will require something even crazier than skip bombing. Something even more unapproved. Something no pilot should ever attempt. The reserve German column punches forward with renewed aggression, engines roaring through the forest like iron thunder. Fallen branches snap beneath treads. Dust plumes rise behind them. Their formation is tight, disciplined, moving not like a retreating force, but like a spear, aimed straight at the heart of the American advance. Harlow angles his crippled thunderbolt into a wide arc, fighting the drag from his damaged wing. Every vibration feels like a warning. Every dip in air pressure threatens to send him spiraling into the treetops again. Ellison pulls alongside him, close enough that Harlow can see the tension etched across the captain's jaw. "They're heading for the engineers," Ellison growls. "If they cut that crossing, we lose the whole line." Behind them, the rest of the squadron regroups, stretching into a staggered V. 7 Thunderbolts had started the operation. Only 4 still carry ordnance. 2 have jammed guns. All are low on fuel. This is not the force you send against a fresh armored column. But it's the force that's here. And that has to be enough. Harlow glances down. Through gaps in the trees, he sees the German armor picking up speed, moving from the forest road onto a narrow dirt lane that snakes toward the river canyon. They know this terrain. They know the Americans won't expect an armored push here. And at their pace, they'll reach the engineers in minutes. He toggles his radio. "Duke! We can't hit them from above. That lane's too narrow, too covered." Ellison knows. Harlow can hear it in the silence that follows. Dive bombing won't work. Standard strafing won't do enough. And skip bombing requires open ground. This lane is half covered by trees and rock. Unless the idea hits Harlow like a jolt of electricity. Insane, illogical, forbidden in every manual ever written. He tastes copper on his tongue as the adrenaline surges. "Duke, what if we hit them from behind?" Ellison narrows his eyes. "Behind?" "Their backs are open. They're in column formation. If we come in low, lower than low, we can punch straight through the line. Catch them in a funnel." Ellison swears under his breath. "Harlow, that's not a run. That's a death sentence. Those tanks will fire point blank." Harlow's voice steadies. "Only if they can swing their guns around in time." He looks down at the advancing column. The tanks are locked into forward movement, churning dust, flanked by half-tracks carrying grenadiers. Their turrets point ahead, scanning for roadblocks, not sky threats. They'll have only seconds to react to a rear attack at treetop height. Seconds aren't enough. Not if the Americans strike hard, not if they strike now. Harlow takes a long, slow breath. This is beyond unapproved, beyond reckless. But he isn't thinking about the manuals anymore. He's thinking about the engineers, the boys building the makeshift bridge at the river, the infantry waiting to cross, the artillery trying to get into position. If the column reaches them, the entire advance collapses. Ellison finally breaks the silence. "All flights form line astern. We follow Harlow's vector." A chorus of acknowledgments follows, steady, controlled, but each one carrying a trembling edge of disbelief. Harlow feels a knot tighten in his chest. They trust him. They're actually trusting him. He rolls inverted, dives to 20 meters, and uses the contour of the valley as cover, slipping behind a ridge that runs parallel to the Germans. The Thunderbolt shudders in the turbulence, but Harlow holds the line. Trees whip past. Dust trails behind him. The shadow of his aircraft dances across the undergrowth. The German rearguard comes into view, a supply truck, 2 armored cars, and behind them 5 Panzerabwehr's grinding forward in perfect column. They have no idea he's there. Harlow guns his engine. The Thunderbolt surges forward, fast, aggressive, unstoppable. Ellison and the others tighten behind him, forming a deadly arrowhead. Harlow lowers his gun sight, centering it on the rearmost panzer. He squeezes the trigger. 8 50 cals spit flame. The rounds punch through the engine deck like a hail of molten nails. The panzer erupts in a plume of black smoke, treads screeching as it jackknifes sideways and blocks the lane. The Germans panic. Turrets begin to rotate slowly, too slowly. The second Thunderbolt slashes overhead, strafing the half-tracks. A third drops a 260-pound fragmentation bomb that detonates beneath the overhanging trees, showering the armored cars with shrapnel. The lane turns into a killing funnel, but the Germans don't break. 3 remaining Panzer IVs surge forward, pushing wreckage aside, determined to reach the engineers, even if they have to drive through a storm of gunfire. Harlow pulls up, wheezing as the G-force hits his bruised ribs. But as he climbs, something horrific comes into view. The German lead tank is almost out of the lane, almost into the open plain, almost free to race straight toward the river crossing. And the squadron is out of position to stop it, unless Harlow does something even more reckless than everything he's already done today. He tightens his grip on the stick. He knows what he has to do. But even he isn't sure he'll survive it. The lead German tank bursts from the mouth of the forest lane like a charging bull, treads throwing dirt in 2 violent arcs. Its turret is already rotating toward the open plain, toward the thin smoke column, where American engineers labor over the makeshift bridge across the Seine. 40 men, maybe more. Barely guarded, vulnerable. Harlow sees them, dots in the distance. Tiny figures moving planks, carrying cables, shouting over the roar of rushing water. They don't see the tank yet, but the tank sees them, and its barrel is already lowering. Harlow yanks his Thunderbolt into a steep climb, the plane groaning like an old warhorse pushed beyond its limits. His damaged wing drags him sideways, forcing him to overcorrect. Sweat beads across his brow and drips into his eyes. Ellison's voice cracks over the radio. "Harlow, break off! You don't have the altitude. Don't try it." Harlow isn't listening. He can't, because in his mind, the math is already done. There's no time for a full dive. No time for a proper attack angle. No time for a second pass. The German tank has seconds, before it draws a bead on the engineers. He has one chance. One. And it requires the most dangerous maneuver a fighter pilot can attempt. The snap reversal dive. Not a loop, not a roll, not a split S. This is a half roll followed immediately by a forward snap, using torque and gravity to twist the aircraft into a knife-edge dive within a space barely wide enough to contain the maneuver. It's not in the manual. It's not taught. It kills as many pilots as it saves. But Harlow has no choice. He rolls inverted. The world flips, sky turning into ground and ground into sky. The burning treetops flash beneath him, debris floating like ash in a funeral wind. The broken wing fights the roll. The stick vibrates violently. He feels the aircraft buck. If he hesitates for even a fraction of a second, he doesn't. He snaps the stick forward and cuts throttle. The Thunderbolt falls, not dives, falls like a stone. The sudden drop slams him against the harness. His breath is knocked from his lungs. The plane screeches, buffeted by crosswinds, tumbling toward the lead panzer at a near vertical angle. Ellison shouts, "Harlow, pull out! Pull out!" But Harlow isn't pulling out. Not yet. He lines up the gun sight as the tank fills his canopy. A great gray beast of German steel, turret swinging but too slow, caught off guard by the insane downward plunge of a single wounded thunderbolt. Harlow squeezes the trigger. 8 .50 caliber Brownings roar with savage fury. The muzzle flashes strobe across his cockpit. Rounds tear through the tank's engine deck, punching into the vents and hull seams. A second later, the Panzer erupts. A column of flame bursts from the turret ring, straight into the morning air. The tank shudders, lurches, and then detonates from the inside, ammo cooking off in a chain reaction of fire and force. But Harlow is still falling, and the earth is rising. He slams the throttle forward, screams from the strain, and pulls back with everything he has left. The edges of his vision dim. His spine feels like it's being compressed into powder. The thunderbolt shrieks, wings flexing dangerously. The ground fills his canopy. Trees blur upward. A rock outcrop flashes past so close he can see every crack. The thunderbolt finally yanks upward, clearing the grass by bare inches. Harlow exhales a ragged, shaking breath. He's alive. Barely. Ellison's voice returns, equal parts fury and awe. Harlow, you crazy, magnificent bastard. Behind them, the destruction spreads. The lead tank burns fiercely, blocking the narrow exit. The second tank, unable to stop in time, slams into it, jamming the lane. A third tries to maneuver around, but gets caught in a strafing run by Lieutenant Burke. The entire German wedge collapses into chaos. And now, for the first time, the reserve column hesitates. They've lost their spearhead. They've lost momentum. And the Americans seize the moment. The remaining thunderbolts descend in a synchronized wave, raking the trapped armor with fire and fragmentation. Tanks stall. Half tracks burst into flame. Grenadiers scatter into the tree line, only to be met by strafing arcs that chew the ground around them. The German push disintegrates, but Harlow doesn't celebrate. He circles, gasping for breath, vision still watery, hands trembling on the stick, because the fight isn't over. From the corner of his eye, he spots movement deeper in the forest. A final cluster of German armor, holding back, waiting. A last stand force meant to protect the retreat. And something else hits him. They're not protecting a retreat. They're protecting a supply column, one carrying fuel, munitions, and radios. If that supply group escapes east, the Germans can regroup, reorganize, strike again tomorrow. This is the real target, the heart of the day's battle. Harlow steadies his grip. He knows exactly what comes next, and it will require breaking the rule book one last time. A breeze shifts the smoke just enough for Harlow to see it clearly. A cluster of vehicles half hidden by dense woodland, spaced with deliberate care. These are not frontline tanks. Their silhouettes are different, leaner, boxier, vulnerable. Supply trucks, radio vans, fuel carriers. In any armored advance, these are the organs that pump blood and breath into the spearhead. Lose them, and even the most determined counterattack becomes a limp, dying thing. Harlow angles his thunderbolt to gain a better vantage. The damaged wing complains bitterly. Every movement feels like balancing on shattered glass. But he keeps the aircraft steady, eyeing the cluster below like a hawk sizing up prey. Ellison notices the shift. "What do you see, Jack?" Harlow exhales, forcing calm into his voice. "Fuel trucks, radio units, munitions." A beat. The whole nervous system. Ellison doesn't respond immediately. The weight of the moment hangs in the static. "If we cut that," he finally says, "the Germans aren't just beaten. They're blind, deaf, paralyzed." Harlow nods, though Ellison can't see it. He banks lower. But this time, the Germans are prepared. Camouflage netting ripples. A pair of 20mm flak Vierling emplacements rises from behind a hedgerow, gunners scrambling into position. Two SDO KFs, 251 half-tracks, move forward to screen the supply trucks, their mounted machine guns swiveling toward the sky. The Germans have seen what the Thunderbolts did to the first ambush and the reserve column. They know this third cluster is the last thing standing between them and chaos, and they intend to hold. Harlow watches as the flak Vierling barrels elevate, shining dully in the smoky light. Ellison's voice sharpens instantly. "All birds, watch for Quad 20. They'll rip us apart if we make a clean approach." He's right. A normal dive will get them killed. The emplacement has a perfect field of fire. No trees, no terrain breaks, no blind angle. Harlow scans the area again. There, a shallow ravine running parallel to the supply group, almost invisible from above. A narrow trench carved by rainwater and years of runoff. Too small for vehicles, too deep for tanks to target, but not too narrow for a single, reckless fighter pilot. A plan forms. Unrealistic, implausible, insane. He feels himself grin despite the exhaustion. "Duke, I think I can slip through that ravine." Ellison's reply comes fast, almost panicked. "Absolutely not. That's suicide. You don't have the clearance." But Harlow has already lowered his nose, lining up the slope. His altimeter unwinds. 120 feet. 80, 50, 30. The ravine yawns before him, a sliver of earth between jagged rock walls. Ellison shouts, "Harlow, don't!" But Harlow is already committed. The Thunderbolt drops into the ravine like a roller coaster plunging from its peak. The rock walls blur past inches from the wingtips. Dust rises in swirling vortices. Loose stones rattle against the fuselage. At one point, the landing gear nearly scrapes a protruding ledge. But the ravine shields him, absolutely, from the flak Vierling's line of sight. Harlow throttles down to minimize his profile. The Thunderbolt hums, whispering more than roaring. The ground is a blur beneath him. Ahead, the ravine curves left. If he misjudges the turn by a hair, he'll shear off both wings and slam into the rock. He banks. The plane groans. Metal flexes. A stone clips his right wingtip, sending a metallic shriek through the cockpit. But he makes the turn. The ravine opens slightly, giving him a brief window, a slanted angle upward, aimed directly at the heart of the German supply convoy. He sees it now. 4 fuel trucks, 2 ammo carriers, a radio van, flak Vierling crews focusing upward, unaware death is coming from below the horizon. Harlow slams the throttle. The Thunderbolt rockets upward out of the ravine, exploding from the earth like a predator bursting from water. The Germans freeze. They did not expect this. No one could expect this. Harlow levels out enough to stabilize his gun sight, though the wounded right wing wobbles violently. He squeezes the trigger. 8 .50 caliber streams erupt from the wings. The first burst tears into the lead fuel truck. Flames shoot skyward. Fuel sprays like a bursting artery. The second burst rips through the ammo carrier. It detonates in a blinding flash. The radio van goes next, shattering under a storm of rounds. Behind him, the explosion chain reacts upward and outward, a wall of fire chasing the trucks toward the tree line. German infantry dive for cover. The flak veerling swings too slowly, too late. In seconds, the supply cluster becomes a boiling vortex of flame. Harlow climbs through drifting black smoke, heart pounding so violently he can hear it in his ears. Ellison comes on radio. Quiet, reverent. Jack, that gutsy move just gutted the entire counterattack. But the mission isn't over. Because as the smoke clears, a single surviving vehicle emerges from the flames. A lone command half-track, swerving, accelerating, escaping through a hidden side path. It carries officers, maps, orders, intelligence, the brain of the operation. If it escapes, the Germans could rebuild again tomorrow. Harlow steadies his trembling hands. He knows what has to be done, and he knows he might not have enough aircraft left in his battered frame to do it. The command half-track bursts from the smoke, like a ghost escaping a burning cathedral, its engines screaming, wheels hammering against the dirt as it swerves onto a narrow side path barely wider than its chassis. The vehicle lurches and fishtails, but doesn't stop. Whoever's inside knows exactly what they're carrying and exactly why they must survive. Through the canopy haze, Harlow tracks its movement. A white recognition flag flaps from its antenna, standard practice for German command units when transmitting orders. Beneath that flag sit maps, code books, field radios, officer logs. Losing this vehicle would mean chaos for the Germans. Keeping it would mean they can rebuild everything Harlow and the squadron shattered today. Ellison sees it too. Jack, that's their command wagon. Harlow swallows hard, sweat drying on his cheeks in thin white streaks. Yes, if that thing gets away, the counterattack isn't dead. I know. Harlow banks left, but the plane shudders. The damaged wing bites cruelly at the air. The Thunderbolt is struggling, bleeding speed, altitude, and structural integrity. Every second feels like wrestling a dying animal to keep it moving. Ellison hesitates. Jack, you barely have control. Let one of us take it. But the others are too high, too far, or too low on fuel. They'd never catch the half-track in time, and Harlow knows it. He pushes the throttle forward. The engine coughs, then roars. The Thunderbolt lurches after the fleeing command unit. The chase is on. The half-track veers left, bumping along a trench cut into the woods, ducking under branches, disappearing and reappearing between the trees like a silver-gray serpent. Its crew fires sporadically upward with rifles and an MG-34 mounted on the roof. The muzzle flashes twinkle like fireflies. But they're aiming too high. Harlow is too low. Too low for safety. Too low for reason. But exactly low enough for the kill. Trees whip past inches from his wingtips. Leaves burst into whirlwinds around his canopy. The Thunderbolt heaves and rattles with every bump of the uneven air. Harlow fights the controls like a man wrestling fate itself. The half-track emerges again, closer. Harlow lines up the gun sight. The reticle wobbles violently, his broken wing making precision nearly impossible. He grits his teeth. Come on, come on. Another bounce. The reticle slips. He steadies it, barely. The half-track darts sharply right, taking a curve in the forest path so tight that its wheels lift off the ground. The MG-34 gunner tries again, spraying rounds that whip past Harlow's canopy in glowing streaks. Then, the path narrows so much that the half-track must slow to push between two leaning trees. This is the moment. Harlow dives, aligning himself with a corridor barely taller than his aircraft. Ellison screams into the radio. Harlow, don't you dare! but Harlow already has. He fires. 850 calls erupt, their recoil shoving the Thunderbolt upward as a hurricane of rounds pours into the narrowing choke point. The command half-track takes the first hits across its rear armor, sparks flying. The gunner slumps backward instantly, collapsing over the railing. The driver swerves, tires skidding through loose dirt. Harlow keeps firing. Rounds punch through the roof, through the engine housing, through the officer compartment. The half-track jerks violently, slewing sideways before striking a tree trunk with a deafening crack. The collision flips it onto its side, its wheels spinning in the air for a brief moment before settling into stillness. But Harlow is still committed to the dive, and the ravine ahead is rising fast. He pulls back on the stick. The Thunderbolt groans, long, low, desperate. The damaged wing nearly stalls. The plane sinks lower, lower. Branches scrape the belly. A stump whips past the fuselage. A rock outcropping flashes under his left wheel. For one horrifying second, Harlow thinks, this is where it ends. But the Thunderbolt claws upward at the last instant, bursting into open sky with a scream of straining metal. The forest drops away. The air clears. Harlow gasps, finally breathing again. Behind him, the command half-track burns quietly, flames licking through its shattered windows. The white recognition flag melts into ash. Ellison comes over the radio, voice low, almost shaken. "Jack, that was impossible." Harlow answers with a weary, shaky laugh. "Then it's good we didn't know that before I tried it." But the battle is not fully over. Below, the remnants of the German armored units, leaderless, fueled by panic more than strategy, begin to pull back. The counterattack force collapses inward, some attempting to scatter into the woods, others abandoning vehicles entirely. Yet Harlow notices something crucial. No German unit is moving forward anymore. None are threatening the bridge. None are regrouping. The fight is ending. He circles once more, searching for hidden threats. Instead, he sees something unexpected. Small figures, dozens, emerge from the riverside fog. American engineers, infantry, signalmen. They look up at the sky, at him, at the squadron, and they raise their hands in silent salute. Harlow doesn't wave back. He just smiles weakly. The rule book was broken today, again and again and again. But sometimes war doesn't reward the obedient. It rewards the brave. The Thunderbolt floats above the river valley like a wounded falcon, wings trembling, engine whining in a tired, ragged rhythm. Harlow can feel every shudder through the control stick. His arms ache. His ribs throb in time with his heartbeat. Each breath is hot, metallic, sharp. But the sky is suddenly quiet, almost painfully quiet. The smoke trails drift lazily now, no longer pushed by frantic motion or exploding shells. The treetops sway gently beneath him, carrying the echoes of the battle like distant memories. The burning remains of the German counterattack smear the forest floor in streaks of black and orange. It is over. Ellison settles into formation beside him, far enough to avoid the turbulence from Harlow's battered aircraft, close enough that Harlow can see the concern behind his eyes. He keys his mic. "Jack, talk to me. How's that bird holding together?" Harlow forces a breath through clenched teeth, like a sack of bolts in prayer. Ellison huffs a tired laugh. "Sounds about right." Behind them, the squadron reforms in a loose, uneven arc. 7 Thunderbolts had started the operation. 5 remain airborne. 2 limp badly. 1 trails smoke. All show scars of the fight, holes punched through wings, scratches from branches, soot streaks, blood on the fuselage of one from a ricochet that had grazed a pilot's leg. But they're alive. Alive because one pilot refused to follow the manual. Harlow banks slowly toward the river, struggling to maintain altitude. The engineers below finish anchoring the final beams of the temporary bridge. Nearly 50 men stand along the bank, rifles slung loosely, helmets tilted back. As Harlow approaches, they lift their arms again. This time, it isn't just a salute. They cheer. Even from the cockpit, he can see the raw gratitude, the disbelief that their narrow strip of wood and steel still stands, that they still breathe, that the German armor never came thundering through the trees to tear them apart. One of the engineers waves both arms wildly, as if signaling a friend across a football field. Another lifts his helmet high, swinging it overhead. Harlow gives a small dip of his wing, a gesture barely visible, but it's all the battered aircraft can manage. The engineers erupt in louder cheers. Ellison's voice comes gently over the radio. "You saved them today, Jack." But Harlow shakes his head. "No, we saved them." Ellison doesn't argue. He doesn't need to. The truth is written across the forest below. The burning wreckage of tanks, the shattered lines of German infantry, the cratered earth carved by thunderbolt fury. Every broken vehicle is a testament to the squadron's fight. Every plume of smoke is a warning to any German unit within miles. Not today, not this field, not this river. Harlow's damaged wing dips again, this time not intentionally. The stall alarm chirps. Ellison sees it instantly. "Jack, bring her home, now!" Harlow scans the horizon. The nearest emergency landing strip lies west, an improvised dirt runway used by forward air controllers. Not ideal, barely long enough, but it's all he has left. He sets his heading. The thunderbolt groans as he descends toward the clearing. Each second feels like pulling a machine made of bones and steel through its final breaths. Smoke trickles from the wing root. The engine splutters, coughs, catches again. A mile out, Harlow lowers the landing gear. The left wheel locks. The right wheel hesitates, then snaps into place with a heavy clunk. Harlow exhales shakily. "Good girl. Just a little farther." He lines up with the dirt strip. The ground rises. The plane sinks. The stall warning blares now, angry, insistent. Harlow holds the stick steady. "Come on, stay with me." The wheels hit the earth. Hard. The thunderbolt bounces once, twice, then slams down. Dust erupts in a huge plume behind the tail. The aircraft veers right. Harlow fights it. Veers left. He corrects. And then the thunderbolt rolls to a stop. Silence. Harlow slumps back in the seat, every muscle trembling with exhaustion. His hands remain locked to the stick, knuckles white, as if letting go might cause everything to unravel. Ground crewmen sprint toward the aircraft. One climbs onto the wing, peers into the cockpit, and freezes. "Jesus, you're the guy they're yelling about on the radio." Harlow manages a crooked smile. "I hope they said something nice." The crewman laughs, shaking his head in disbelief. Ellison's thunderbolt lands moments later. The captain climbs out and jogs toward Harlow, dust trailing behind him. When he reaches the cockpit, he grips the edge of the canopy and looks at his lieutenant. For a moment, he says nothing. Then, "Jack Harlow, you broke every rule in the book today." Harlow shrugs weakly. "Sometimes the rule book doesn't see the battlefield." Ellison nods. "Sometimes the battlefield needs a man who doesn't see the rule book." Harlow chuckles, then winces from the pain. Ellison offers a hand. Harlow grips it. And as his boots touch the ground, the weight of the day finally settles, not like a burden, but like the end of a long, impossible climb. Above them, the smoke thins. Below them, the engineers continue building the bridge that will carry the Allied advance deeper into France. And somewhere beyond the tree line lie the shattered remains of a German counterattack, undone not by numbers, not by strategy, but by a pilot willing to risk everything on a series of unapproved, impossible maneuvers. War rarely rewards perfection, but it remembers courage, especially the kind that rewrites the battlefield in minutes.